Thank you very much for joining me in this video. Last week we talked about commercial real estate, and this week we're going to continue on with that theme of commercial real estate. As you know, investors are usually involved, when they're involved in real estate, either with residential real estate or with commercial real estate. If you're an investor, I hope as you develop your portfolio, you branch into commercial real estate, and investors should do that at some point in time. Residential real estate, although it's the backbone of investment, because people always need a roof over their head, it's got certain challenges. One of the challenges is the oppressive legislation that is the Residential Tenancies Act. It locks in your rent at the legal increase that you can charge from 1 year to the next if the tenant doesn't vacate. And you got huge problems. If you have a problem tenant that isn't paying the rent or causing a problem and you want to evict them, huge. Then there's the tenant issues day to day, where you get a call because a tap is dripping, you get a call because a toilet isn't working, or because a fridge has stopped working, or one element of the stove, and on it goes. Those type of problems. And then there's the added costs. You may get $2,500 a month for the house you're renting out, and that sounds like good money, but you've got certain utility expenses, you've got repair and maintenance expenses, you've got tax expenses, you've got insurance expenses, and all those things erode into your profit, and what you keep is a lot less than what you bring in. Commercial real estate gives you a break from those specific problems. First of all, the legislation that governs commercial real estate is not the Residential Tenancies Act, it's the Commercial Tenancies Act. It's a much more fair and balanced piece of legislation. You're free to charge market rent. When the lease comes due, you renegotiate and charge market rent. If you need to get rid of a tenant, it's very simple and straightforward. And at the end of the lease, if you need the space, they're out. So it's a much more balance there. And the other thing about commercial tenancies is they tend to be what we call triple net or net lease. What that means is all the expenses that you bear as a landlord when you're doing residential rentals are passed on to the tenant with commercial rentals. So not only do you not get calls in the middle of the night because the tap's dripping, that's the tenant's problem. You don't get calls when the roof leaks, that's the tenant's problem. A light fixture isn't working, that's the tenant's problem. But so too are the expenses on the day-to-day basis. The idea is that the money you bring in, you can pretty much keep in your pocket. Let me read a clause from a standard commercial tenancy, and you'll understand what I mean. Listen to this. The landlord and the tenant agree that it is the mutual intention that this lease shall be completely carefree net lease for the landlord, and that the landlord shall not, during the term of the lease, be required to make any payments in any respect of the premises other than charges of a kind personal to the landlord, such as income and estate taxes and mortgage payments. So it's saying, listen, Mr. Tenant, you're on the hook for all the expenses. If you pay me X number of dollars a month, I keep X number of dollars a month. That is very, very nice and much more lucrative. Of course, there's exposure with a commercial tenancy. We've talked about that before. If it's vacant, especially if the economy happens to be tough, people always need a roof over their head. They don't always need a business. It may sit vacant for a long time. But the other thing I want you to understand that even in a triple net lease, you aren't free from expenses. The clause says that it is in respect of the premises, expenses in respect of a premises. So there are certain things that wouldn't be automatically passed on to the tenant. For example, the roof needs to be replaced on the plaza, or the parking lot needs to be replaced in the plaza. Now, some landlords may be able to put that in TMI under maintenance. It depends on the size of the expense. But often it's something that the landlord's going to have to absorb. And some tenancies have a built-in contingency to collect the amount of money as a reserve, almost like a condominium does. So the landlord's got some money ahead for these capital expenditures. But they got to keep an eye on what their total TMI is because they got to be competitive. So there's some challenges there, and there are some expenses that the landlord's going to have to bear, and the landlord and the tenant need to understand that going into the lease. But there's another gray area, and I want to deal with this because it can cause all kinds of problems. And the gray area is the HVAC, the rooftop unit that controls the heating and the air conditioning. often the lease doesn't address it. Now, if I read you that clause about a triple net to the landlord, if it's all that's in the lease and there's no mention to HVAC, then it's understood that if the HVAC unit needs repair or replacement, it's the tenant's problem. And that's very expensive. I've got a small building and I have one rooftop unit for about every 1,500 square feet of leasable space. And these rooftop units, if they need to be replaced, run between $15,000 and $20,000 to replace them. And so you've got a huge challenge. Now, if you're renting out a space and there's nothing said in the lease, the tenant is going to be responsible. If you've got one space and the HVAC unit is 4 years old, and let's say the life expectancy is 15 years, you've got another one that's 14 years old, the tenant going to the one has got much more exposure than the other. It's just flat out not fair. I, as a tenant, have spent a lot of money paying for HVAC units for landlord space. I, as a landlord, have spent a lot of money for HVAC units that is a tenant space because it's not clear, and you can bet if you're the landlord and you haven't discussed it, haven't addressed it in the lease, and all of a sudden the HVAC unit needs to be replaced, and you tell a tenant, by the way, it's going to cost you $18,000, you're going to have a problem. And so it needs to be addressed. And I think one of the ways of addressing it that's really, really fair is this, and I'll give you a clause that can be inserted. There's some clauses that are more specific than this one, but it says it. And I think that's a fair compromise for a landlord because, as I say, the HVAC unit can be very, very old or very, very new when the tenant moves in. What it says is, Mr. Tenant, regarding HVAC, you are committed to maintain a service agreement with a certified HVAC company all the time you're leasing the space, and you're responsible for repair and maintenance, including parts. However, if the unit becomes inoperative and it is impossible or impractical to repair it, it needs to be replaced, I will be responsible for the cost of replacing that unit. And it's addressed in the lease and it solves your problem. This is what it says in this clause. The tenant shall enter into and maintain a service agreement with a certified HVAC company during the currency of the lease period and any extensions thereto. The tenant shall be responsible for all repairs and maintenance expenses, including parts replacement as required. However, in the event the unit becomes inoperable and it is impossible or impractical to repair the system, the HVAC unit shall be replaced, including both acquisition and installation costs at the expense of the landlord. And how do you determine what needs to be replaced? That's what the HVAC repair company that's doing the maintenance tells you. And when they say it really is impractical to replace the condenser, replace the fan motor, replace whatever, it needs to be, the whole unit needs to be replaced, then it's clear in the lease who does it. Solve that problem before it crops up and everything will work far better. But if you're representing a landlord and you're entering into negotiation with a lease and you look over the lease, if there's nothing mentioned about HVAC, have a discussion. I hope that makes sense. Thank you for investing your time. Talk to you again next week.